This is recording by Julia Schwinn with Betty Smith for Historic Madison on March 12, 1986. Betty Smith was one of the founders of Historic Madison in 1973, and that's one of our interests in interviewing her. Betty, our oral history group thought it would be interesting to learn how the organization began and what its original aims were, what sorts of people gave it a start. I was wondering what brought you into it.
Well, I was elected to the city council in the spring of '73, and I was happened to be at a stage in my life where I did have a lot of time, and so I was on a lot of committees. Very enthusiastically got on committees. And my memory is that this Historic Madison was set up a little before I joined it. But I have a note here that, what was that, December
11th.
December 11th of '74, that the mayor officially appointed me to the Historic Madison Committee or Commission, whatever it's called.
73, I think it is.
73. Did I say 72? 73. And my memory is that we met in the library, and that Bernie Schwab was always there and interested. And I don't remember too many other people who were there, but one of the things that became clear to us was that they were going to have a repository of documents and things like that, which I felt were important. Mm-hmm. And I was certainly for that. Actually, this probably was all involved with Bernie Schwab being an excellent librarian and head of the library system, and trying to get the library to be used more and more effectively, you see. And I think that we had that feeling that this was one of the things he was going to do to be of service to the community.
Mm-hmm.
So get this started.
Probably, I should know and don't. I don't know whether he was on the board originally or just offered the services of the library.
Yeah, well, I don't have my records that I know of, so I don't know.
We can look that up.
Yeah, what the situation was. My memory was that it was a rather large board, 12 or 13 people, and we met, I don't think monthly, but at the library, and what's his name, he was there, I know, right from the start.
Mm-hmm. Did it seem to be mostly a kind of mix of people?
Well,
what's your impression? Old or
no,
old-timers?
See, the other thing was that this was also at the same time there was a great deal of interest in restoring downtown and restoring old buildings and the historical aspect of that, and we were in the process of trying to build a civic center. And in the process also, I think probably Leigh Mollenhoff was one of those. When the Mollenhoff did so much to get restoration.
She was one of the originators.
Yeah, and I think maybe David was on too. And they were, of course, involved in restoration of older homes and getting people to move back into older homes over there on the east side. And a lot of us were feeling very encouraging about that kind of thing. And so this was appealing to us as a vehicle where records could be kept. And
so it wasn't just that the mayor said, I want you to be on this board.
No, I used to ask him to be on things, so he probably put me on because I wanted to be, you know.
Those were exciting times on the council, as I recall.
Oh, yeah.
And I can't remember just all the things that were happening besides the civic center. But, was it open housing in your regime?
No, we got some, but the big push for that was '63. Mm-hmm. But I just was looking here at some of my notes. We were big into worrying about pornography because we had the nude dancing there, you know, over by the what street?
The Dangle.
The Dangle, yes. And of course, the funny thing about that was that Mayor Dyke had taken their liquor license away And so then they just charged $1.50, and anybody could come in. And of course, the young kids from all around town then were there buying a Coke for $1.50 so they could see the sights. So that didn't work out quite the way they thought. So they gave them back their liquor license, but then there was a lot of trouble about pornography. Richard E. Pritchard would come and appear, and I remember sometimes the dancers would come over to show us that they weren't such dreadful people.
Over to the council.
Over to the council and talk to us about all this stuff. And this is purely on the side, but the State Journal for several years kept writing editorially that we ought not to have pornography and we ought not to have nude dancing, but they kept advertising the places, you know. So I finally called up Spiegel and said that I thought, he was the editor, that he ought to quit advertising them if he thought they were so evil. I said, we're all in this together. You can do your bit too. And so he told me to call Murph Woolman, who was the business manager. So I called Murph, and he says, now this is all a matter of business, Betty. And so I noticed they did quit later. But the interesting thing to me was that a little later, Murphy sent a check for $3,000 to the daycare center that I was interested in.
Oh, good.
So I didn't ever know whether that was to quiet me down or whether I really had that coming or what. We had a lot of interest. There was, we were looking at mass transit, you know. Mm-hmm. At that time, Soglin was extremely interested in getting more buses, and we were hoping that if we got a lot of buses that we wouldn't have so much traffic, because State Street, you'll recall when we had traffic on State Street, it didn't really move. You know, you just sort of sat in line and kept hoping that you'd get to advance a little bit. And so that was another one of the big issues. And then as we moved along on that particular project, why we finally decided to just take traffic off State Street, but that doesn't have much to do with this. But these are just some things that were going on.
Well, I'm interested in, and other people will be too, in what particular things you were up in the council at that time and what you were particularly interested in. Your other activities as well. You mentioned a daycare center you were involved in.
Well, I had several years before, Judge Bruner had gotten me all involved with daycare. What had happened there was that there really had been no daycare as such. There were nursery schools, but not daycare, which was full day, except that the Salvation Army was running, and the judge was feeling a need for it, and also he was up for re-election. And so he got a committee going, and we set up 3 daycare centers. One in South Madison, one in Middleton, and one, I think, at the Methodist Church. Well, we hadn't been running long before we found we weren't going to have enough money. Mm-hmm. And so I made a couple of trips to Washington to try to talk Congress into giving us more money for daycare, but that proved to be totally fruitless and still is. But then South Madison was in a redevelopment area, and so all of a sudden, after Martin Luther King was killed, some people down there decided they wanted to help build a daycare center, which they did. And then, this is all another story too, the Attic Angels then gave them the money to build it.
Oh, I didn't know.
And so, well, that's, I'm leaving out a lot of things, but we got that going, but then we hardly ever had money for it. Right, and so that was one of the things that Mayor Soglin and our council took some strong stands on, and got a city daycare committee going, and got some city funds, and we still have a city daycare committee that we have sometimes
council committee.
No, we have also a group hired by the city that goes around checks on daycare and that sort of thing. But Mayor Soglin was very interested in that, and I was too. That was one of the things that I felt was urgent. My real interest in all that came from working with welfare mothers and realizing that so many of them had had babies that they really hadn't meant to have, weren't able to take care of them, and needed most of all to get jobs and be able to support these children, and daycare seemed to me like the way to go. So I worked real hard on that and still am. And we had a lot of argument. There was a lady over on the east side that said we were just teaching them to say dirty words at our daycare centers. we had a lot of fun about that, you know. But the other things were that we were fighting the battle of the Civic Center, because by 74, our bonds had all been paid for Civic Center. We had $1.5 million that we paid for. The bond issue was in 54, and we're still fighting about where to locate it. And so that fight went on at that time. And then State Street was full of potholes and in terrible condition, stores coming and going, and just really bad shape. So that was another big thing of interest.
How long were you on the council?
I was on 6 years, and then I came back for 3 months when the councilman died, and I took his place so they could elect someone new.
Let's see, now was Soglin...
I was there all the time he was
time
mayor.
that he was mayor.
And you see, when he decided not to run for mayor, then I ran for mayor.
Oh, yeah.
And I
That
got
was in
defeated, 79.
79. That was, well, how did you have time to do all these things? Your children must have been...
Yeah, our
strong by
last
that
one was
time.
in college, and
Uh-huh.
so that made it much easier. And I just had a lot of time and decided that I wanted to spend my time doing that sort of thing,
Mm-hmm.
I was on the welfare board too, and that was when we were trying to get rid of Lowell, which we finally did.
Yeah.
He was a terrible welfare director.
Now, were you trained professionally as a social?
No.
Not in that area at all.
My degree is in journalism, actually.
Uh-huh. Did you grow up in Madison?
No, I'm from Nebraska,
Uh-huh.
but I came here to the university when I was a junior,
I see.
and that was my big interest.
Never got away.
No, I wouldn't want to go away. No way, not even yet. Yeah.
And your husband, I guess, didn't.
My husband was
Madison either, did he?
Yes, he did.
Oh, did he?
And he was an alderman, you see, for 6 years, from 63 to 69. And then I was from 73 to 79. I think we're the only couple that's ever been on
Oh, that's interesting.
on the city council. Yeah. But well, you remember Henry Reynolds ran against mayor in 74, Mayor Soglin?
Yeah.
We were really, we had many committees. Soglin got us going on a whole lot of things, and actually, it was a time of great social upheaval just prior to that. And so we had a number of activists on the council who had particular things they wanted to see through. My particular thing was daycare. Others were particularly interested in housing. Several of us were very strongly interested in the welfare situation because it was said, of course, that Madison was a welfare haven and that sort of thing, and we felt, though, that the program wasn't being run right.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had an awful lot going on.
You follow the current council enough to know whether it's as active as your council was?
No, it isn't. Not at all.
Setup.
No. And you see, there's lots of reasons for that. I was just looking here in my campaign literature about that time, and for one thing, of course, we did get a lot done. We got the Civic Center built, and we got the State Street Mall done. I noticed here, for example, Garner Park had been developed, and my husband was alderman, but they'd never built the shelter house. And we got the shelter house built. Now, that park still isn't completed, but it's better than it was. And then that was when we started using less salt on the streets, because Windsor, got salty, so we had to do that. So that was nationwide. We got famous for that. And we were all for having a countywide system of welfare, but we didn't get that. We had, just a lot of, it was an exciting time. Mayor Soglin was a very courageous fellow, and so he appointed committees on everything. And then every so often they'd come in with a report and we'd have to do something about it.
He's good support. He was, you get good support.
Yes. And one of the things that I noticed most about him, and this was particularly when I was working on the Civic Center committee, would be that we would run up against some sort of roadblock, and I'd go in and say, well, now I think we should do this, or I think we should do that. Well, Soglin would be sitting there with his shoes off, his necktie at half-mast, smoking a cigarette and all slumped down in his chair looking like he was sound asleep, and come up with some really good strategy to do whatever it was. I really can't remember any of the particular things. I wish I could.
Well, it's nice to get a feel of how things...
But he just was a very good person on strategy, and so we felt, that we had a lot of backing. And I think there was a mood in the city that they wanted some changes made too, and that we really tried awfully hard to improve downtown. One of the aldermen, for example, was all uptight because she lived downtown. She said everywhere she looked out the window, all she could see was cars and no grass. So that we worked real hard for buses and spent a lot of money, and actually did very well on that because we still have a lot of buses.
Well, you accomplished a lot of things.
Yeah.
You got something started, and some have kept going, and some need a little propping up.
Right. That's right.
Well, now, how did your interest in real estate, when did you start in real estate?
Well, I must say that my husband had an interest in real estate because of his law practice, and so it came along sort of like that. I was on the Redevelopment Authority for several years down
I
there
was
in
thinking
South.
there was some transition there.
And then I just got very interested in all this development going on, building the daycare center and the Civic Center and the State Street Mall and all of that. So then I, in 74 and 5, took courses at the university and got my master's degree. And I took a lot of work in the School of Business and in development and from grass camp. So, that was it all fit right in with what I was doing.
Yeah. Well, you knew what would be helpful to people.
Uh-huh.
Do you work mostly with family housing?
Single family, yeah. And I've had real good luck because a lot of people know me, and so it pays a lot better than politics.
I bet it does. Well, you put in pretty nearly full time work for
really
on a little council salary.
Yeah, well, we were getting 150. I think we got 250 before we were through. But
not much per hour.
No, not much per hour is right. I was just trying to see if by any chance I'd come across anything there about the historic business. We really were dreaming big dreams about downtown, and that all added into the history. It seems to me, wasn't there? One of the things we saved is that little statue when they moved the library.
Oh yes.
What was that little girl?
I think somebody said, I think that Janet Ela was a model for that. Is that your understanding? I'm not sure I have that right, and I've never heard it verified, but I know the one you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that was a good beginning for historic preservation.
Yeah, right.
Not a beginning, but a good symbol.
Interestingly, one of the things that was interesting to me was, as we were talking about using the Capitol Theater, or the theater, for the Civic Center, what was that, Capitol? What was the name of that theater that used to be in
the Capitol, I think, wasn't it? Doesn't that sound right?
I don't know.
I think
it is. Well, anyway, somebody noticed that there was a picture of that theater when it was first opened, was in the Commercial State Bank, which was there on State Street, was in the ladies' restroom. And as it turned out, that bank had provided the financing for the theater when it was built. So I finally talked the president of the bank, Bud Paunack, into giving that picture to the city, because he just had it down in his basement after he moved out of that bank building. And so now that's in the lobby, or in the foyer. No, I guess it's in the lobby of the Civic Center.
Oh, wow, it's another
Yeah, as you're down there and going in, that back round part, why the picture is there. And it's really very attractive. It shows it as it was then.
Bud Paunack, I don't know what, he hasn't been a member of the oral history group, but he's going to do at least one interview, and maybe you'll do some more too, of some of the other people who, like yourself, were on the original board. I should ask you before I forget. I never heard anybody but call you anything but Betty. Is your name really Elizabeth?
It was Elizabeth, but I had it changed when I ran for mayor.
Oh.
And now see, I've come on the committee. That's what I was looking for here, to see if it was on here.
And you were born in Nebraska.
I was born in Des Moines, Iowa. My father was in service. And my father then came up to Oshkosh, Wisconsin, where he was head of the training center for the officers training school at Oshkosh Normal Teachers College.
Oh, uh-huh.
And one of his, the people that was there was Justice Currey.
Uh-huh.
Years later, he said, I knew a really nice man from Columbus, Nebraska. His name was Lowell Walker, and that's my father.
Uh-huh.
So that was an interesting thing.
What's your maiden name?
Walker.
W-A-L-K-E-R.
Right. Uh-huh. And so then my dad, after he was discharged from Oshkosh from the Army, went back to Columbus, Nebraska, where he practiced law, and I was raised there.
I see.
Then I went 2 years to Nebraska Wesleyan University, and then I came up here and married, and I've lived here ever since.
Was your mother active as you have been too, or was
Well,
she?
my father was on the city council. Mother was, yes, in a lot of community things. Mm-hmm. And my father was on the city council. I think he was only on for one term, though. He thought it took too much time, and he was probably right.
Yeah.
It usually does. I'm just looking here at the committees, and I think that committee was not a city committee.
No, I think it's as far as I know, it started out as Historic Madison Incorporated, just as a private corporation.
Well, you see, another interesting thing I'm noticing here was that we had the Bicentennial that we were preparing for during those years, and
that may have been one of the impetuses that got some people.
yeah, that's right. And you know, the best thing they did there was to say that we should have the local celebrations. Sorry? We should have the local celebrations, in neighborhoods. And so I talked to our Hill Farm board. I met with them from time to time, and they were very supportive, and we did a lot of things, And so they decided to have a celebration on the 4th of July. What was that, 76? Yeah. And I don't know whether you want all this, but anyway, that was a most marvelous affair. They had hot dogs and ice cream and popsicles and but then they had this great big cake, and that was at Garner Park. Now Alderman Garner was an alderman longer than anybody has ever been. He was an alderman until he was 82. I think he was 37.
I can never remember when he wasn't.
I think it was 37 years that he was on the council. But he was in a nursing home in Oakwood, which was across the street, you see, from Garner Park. Now, Garner Park was named for him, and that was named when Bill was alderman, because Bill was on the council when Garner was an alderman.
I see.
And he thought he was just wonderful.
He was.
And so Bill got that park named for Garner. And so then, when we finished, there was a lot of cake left over from that party. And they took it over to the nursing home and took it right to Mr. Garner's room. And he was so pleased. And his wife and he were both living there at that time. And they were so pleased to have that. And I thought that was a nice little part of history, that he got honored in.
But you think there were, maybe not as good, but similar celebrations in the Bicentennial in areas around the city?
Well, there
I've
was
forgotten
supposed
that.
to be, yeah. I don't, I was busy with my own, so I don't know what happened. But they certainly were supposed to have done that. And I think a lot of neighborhoods did. I thought ours was a little special because I think that at that point the shelter house was quite new, and they were celebrating that too. And then that was their idea, the committee's idea, to take it over to Garner. I didn't think of that. I just thought that was really splendid, that they did that.
Are any of your children following in your active ways?
Well, we have a daughter, our oldest daughter, felt that her father was spending way too much time on council business, because he was on the council when she was in high school, and they had some arguments about the telephone. So we got a new telephone. We got a children's telephone. But she then moved out to New Jersey and moved into a development. They never finished the road in front of her house, and they didn't do right with the sewers and things like that. So all of a sudden, she found herself running for office, and she was on their town council out there from East Windsor, New Jersey, for 8 years.
Good.
Yeah, she campaigned on her bicycle with her little 2-year-old girl and got elected. And she was deputy mayor for a while. See, Bill and I have both been council presidents, and that was what she was too. So, yeah, the other kids haven't been as active in politics.
Yeah, about from your notebook. Incidentally, I hope that you'll talk. I'll ask Donna Hartshorn to call you and talk to you someday about whether you're willing to.
Well, I should at least leave it there if something happens to me. You know, I'll put that note in at least if I don't, because I still think someday I'd like to write about it because we had a lot of fun. Well, this was an interesting thing. My family situation was that our daughter was married on one Saturday in the end of July in 1975, and our son was being married the next Saturday. And so everybody was home. And we had, the mayor had appointed me to the Civic Center Commission, which I think he set up, probably in the fall of '74, finally. And we got going, and we had hired architects, and the architects had presented were into their preliminary planning. And on this particular time, it was the week before, it was the end of July in '75, all right. Okay, on the Tuesday between the two Saturdays, I got a call from Oscar Myers, from the public relations director there, and he doesn't even have his name on here anymore. But he said that Mr. Meyer wanted to make a donation to the Civic Center to get it started, but he didn't want to make this donation until after the council had made one more crucial vote, assuring that they were going to go ahead with the project. And as he was talking to me, he asked me how they might do this. And he started talking about $200,000 or $300,000, and I'm standing out there in the kitchen. I nearly fainted, you know, and what can we do, this sort of thing. And so then he said, well, now we're not going to say anything about this till the council has voted and made this crucial vote. And so then here's this press release, you see, of what happened. We approved the architect's plan to transform the Capitol Theater and to spend $2.5 million on it. And so the Oscar Mayer then issued a challenge grant of $250,000. And the other funny thing about that was that we were invited, the mayor and I and Mike Duffy from the Chamber of Commerce and some others were invited out to this meeting. And the mayor, I had told the mayor that there was going to be something happening. They hadn't talked to him, they talked to me. And so when he heard the amount, he just about fell off his chair because he had bet it was going to be $10,000. $10,000. And here it was this very generous gift of $250,000 matching grant, And that then, another sideline on that was that previous Tuesday evening when we'd been voting on it, Alderman Amato from Nakoma had got up and said that their Citizens Committee would never raise any money because he'd been trying to raise money for various campaigns, and if we raised $20,000, we'd be doing all right. And I pulled on him, so I said, sit down. And when he finally quit talking, I said, you're going to feel like such a jerk next week. I can't even tell you how much of a jerk you're going to feel like. So the next week he said, sure enough, I do feel like a jerk.
Well, that was an exciting week.
Yeah.
That's between two weddings.
Yeah. Yeah, the mayor and Beech, who was chairman of the board, and the executive vice president, Oscar Myers, and the chairman of the Civic Center Committee was Jim Young,
And I and Mike Duffy were invited out for that, you know. You can see I was all excited. I got it.
Yeah.
But then, you see, the most marvelous thing that happened was that Mrs. P. Goff Beech got involved in the fundraising.
Oh,
And
that
before
was
we
a
were
real coup.
yes, and she got Walter Frautschi involved, and both of them are just terrific fundraisers. And so they raised more than $1 million before we were through. Well, of course, we're still fighting about the thing. And so, if you'll recall, that $1 million was put out at interest during the time of the high interest rates, you remember?
Yeah.
They didn't use that money till the end of the Civic Center construction. And so, that fund ended up with $500,000 of interest that is still being used to, the income from that is being used to help support activities at the Civic Center.
Operating
Yeah,
expenses.
but it was the enthusiasm of Mrs. Beech and Walter, and you know, they just did marvelous things. They would pay themselves to have Renaissance cater a lunch on the stage of this old theater, which was in.
This is side 2 of the interview with Betty Smith for Historic Madison, and we were talking about the efforts of Mrs. Beech and Walter Frautschi in getting money from citizens for the Civic Center. That's an interesting thing that they did. The catering on the old stage
Yeah.
was effective.
Yeah, it sure was. Yeah, it was. It was such an exciting time because of all this that was going on. And now you see, now that they can't spend any money at all, why?
Must be sort of frustrating.
Yeah,
to be on the council.
yeah, they don't. We would have meetings that would go on often till 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. The other thing that happened on that council that was interesting was we had a number of people like to make speeches. And Alderman Parks was one, Gene Parks. He was black, and he loved to get up and carry on. And Mike Sack was another one. And the mayor liked to make speeches. And I know when I was council president, they made a rule that if the mayor spoke on an issue, then he couldn't come back and preside.
Oh.
Particularly on that issue anyway, till that was handled. And he liked to make speeches, so I was up and presiding a great deal because so he could make his speeches, you know, and then he'd often just go home. But our budget things, when we were arguing about things like funding for the Civic Center and the State Street Mall and setting our budgets and things like, there were times we were there till 4 and 5 o'clock in the morning.
For your $200 and something
Right.
a month.
Well, you know, the thing is that people always said, was it boring? And it never was boring to me because one of the things I did was to try to get consensus and get a vote on things and get,
Well, it needed somebody like that.
Yeah, and since I was elected when I was 53, I didn't really care if I got reelected, so I took strong stands and did what I wanted to do, and I didn't worry too much about reelection, although I was glad to be reelected. But what I wanted to do was get a few things accomplished, and so I spent a lot of time trying to figure out where the aldermen were coming from and where I might get another vote.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I got to tell you one funny one about that, and I forget what the vote was on. But we needed Alderman Stavins' vote, and he was sick. He had surgery, and he couldn't sit down. So we had to send a van out to get him because we needed his vote. And he kept walking around in the back of the room because he couldn't sit down, and the mayor wouldn't bring his item up because he was sort of bugging him, you know. And so I kept going up saying, "No, come on, put it on, Mr. Mayor. You know, this is ridiculous." And finally he recognized me, and we got it on and got the vote. Soglin, but Stavins was pretty mad at Soglin. That was a little childish. Another time we needed a vote for the Civic Center to get the money through. See, we always had to have 15 or 18 votes for that. That was always exciting. And so one of the aldermen, the mayor didn't want to go to a meeting of the Chamber of Commerce that they had at one of the country clubs, so this alderman went. I won't mention his name. And he promised me he'd come after the meeting was over because I needed his vote. And he called up about 10:30 and called me. There's a phone there where they can get you, you know. He said that he'd had too much to drink and he couldn't come. I said, we've got to have you. I said, and we're nowhere near through, so you come anyway. And so he said, okay, I'm sitting here drinking coffee, you know. Well, he finally got there about 11:30, and then we had the vote. When it was time to go home, he couldn't find his car. He parked it down. We all had to help him look for his car, so he was pretty far gone. So we went to a lot of trouble to get the votes for that.
Well, you had a lot of little fun along with
Right.
all your hard work.
But you see, now, one of the things that was going along, and I do certainly remember this, was that the Historic Madison and some of the other groups would have that alternate parade of homes.
Mm-hmm.
And we would go to that and be very supportive of that sort of thing. Yeah, yeah, and that was those were kind of continuing things where there were others that were trawling the vineyard, so to speak, and keeping things going. And then also we put city money into the historic preservation kind of thing. You know, I know that Leigh Mollenhoff was in charge of that Landmarks Commission for a long time. She was chairman of that. And so every so often they'd have a dedication or something of another one that they'd made a landmark. And so that sort of was all interwoven with my memories of being on the council, that there were all these big efforts being made to keep the nice buildings. And we were doing our bit by renovating downtown and the State Street Mall and by having the buses and
all worked together.
yeah, I was opposed always to the closing of schools because I felt that they should really keep them, even with small staff, keep them open, and then use them, because I just felt sure they'd need them again, and sure enough now they are, you know. So that was one of the places where we lost, because everybody thought they'd save a lot of money if they closed schools, and you know, the expenses were the same or more, you know, and so, and you see, the other thing was the neighborhood lost from closing the school. And like Maple Bluff, there are many, many houses for sale out there that don't sell because there is no elementary school. And the kids have to be bused, and a lot of people just aren't going to do that. And that is, there were all these strong trends for really just making Madison sort of a donut and having everything on the outskirts. And we were conducting what is at the present time at least a losing fight to try to keep downtown and our heritage going, you see. But
who are all these people that live out around by West Town? Where do these people come from?
well, a lot of professors. Yeah, Parkwood, you know. You know who lives in your area. It's the same bunch, basically.
But there's so much housing and so much out there. I mean, small units look like apartments or flats and condos, and
well, a lot of the secretary and support services for the state government, the federal government,
and the proliferation of shopping malls.
Yeah. Well, that was, we kept hoping that our efforts were going to mean that downtown would be revived as a retail center. And it certainly hasn't. On the other hand, State Street has been stabilized and is maintained, and actually that was another bit of history, because one of the things we were trying to do was to keep the spirit of State Street as it had been built, to have the two-story buildings. And for many, many years, State Street had students living up above the shops that were down below, you see. And that still is a common thing there on State Street, to keep that same kind of spirit. And I think that's another one of the historic efforts we were making, that we were, the man who designed that State Street Mall felt, you know, that was part of what made it a people place, was the history of it being small scale and not huge big buildings that overpower people. But you see, State Street is a street of many uses. It's a retail street, and it's a sightseeing street, and it's meeting street, and it, as a matter of fact, has been a battlefield, you see, actually.
Yeah.
And it's also a transportation street, and it's an entertainment street.
And an eating.
And an eating street, yes.
Yes.
And then it's also, a lot of people just walk up and down. And then you have all the things that go on there in the summer, you know, so that the scale of it, I think, has made it really attractive to people. And that's really the intelligence of that designer, whose name I've forgotten, to keep the people feel there. Now that was, I was on the Urban Design Commission, and there was a lot of talk about the scale of the buildings and the 2 stories and the trees and the planters and the importance of not making it so overwhelming.
Mm-hmm. Well, and maybe the square will have a rejuvenation.
Yeah, I hope so. I think someday it will. Somebody will think of something, you know.
Just quick.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, this is all very interesting, Betty. If you, I don't want to take too much of your time. If you think of things that you should have said, we can do another
We can
tape
do that.
someday.
All right, I'll
Yeah.
do that. I'll be glad to.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The name of the State Street designer.
M. Paul Friedburg, Friedburg, from New York.
Good. Glad to have him.